Welcome. It is no accident that you have found your way to the Release the Genie podcast. What would you do with 3 wishes? And what if you discovered that you are in fact that very genie that could grant them? Well, join us now as we discover who our next genie is as we listen in and learn the stories of triumph, inspiration, and passion with some very special guests. And now, without further delay, your host of the Release the Genie podcast, Mr. Paul Rogers.
That's so much better. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're tuning in from. I am your host, Paul Rogers, and welcome to another episode of Release the Genie. I must admit that you very rarely meet some real heroes in life. They usually have red capes and everything else, which Marvel and DC Universe. But today I am sat in front of as far as I'm concerned, a real hero, certainly to me. I bring you Alex Lewis. He is the founder of the Alex Lewis Trust. He is a quadruple amputee who user of prosthetics. This guy typifies mental and physical fitness. He's done more than what most people do an entire life: cage diving, kayaking around the tip of Greenland, mountaineering. He continues to break barriers, and it is an absolute pleasure to have Alex on the show. So hello, Alex. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm slightly blushing, shall we say, a little bit. But hey, whoever that guy is, he sounds great.
Yeah. It's the shirt, mate. It's the shirt. So, Alex, I kind of set the scene. So I wonder if you could sort of tell us a bit more about you.
So I was not doing an awful lot throughout my life. I had a great schooling. I never really took advantage of that. I think up until the age of 33, I did 3 things right, and that was meeting Lucy, my partner, and that was bending our arm for us to get our first Labrador together, and then after that came our wonderful son Sam. And in November 2013, we were running 2 businesses at the time: 1 restaurant, 1 pub in the countryside in the UK, and I caught man flu. That's about as bad as it was at the time. Being a bloke, I continued to moan and groan and just really, lay it on thick to Lucy that I was struggling. But in that time, I was a stay-at-home dad to my little boy, Sam. Lucy was running a restaurant. I was in the pub running that with him, really. And I was a functioning alcoholic, in all honesty. I was drinking a barrel of Guinness a week, so 80, 90 pints. I was drinking maybe 12 to 14 bottles of wine a week. It was completely out of control. But I couldn't see it. I just thought I was, going through the motions and everything was going pretty well. And then the man flu hit, and it got worse over a period of 2 weeks. And after about 14 days, I remember going to bed one night, and I woke up at around 3 a.m, and there was blood in my urine. So I remember going back to bed. Lucy was there, and I said, "Look, darling, I think something's really, really bad." And she said, "Look, go back to sleep. In the morning, we'll get hold of the doctor, and then we'll go from there." In the morning, I woke up about 7:30, I think. Lucy had gone to open our restaurant, and I was in the pub on my own. Luckily, the night before, my son went to my parents to stay the night. And when I woke up, I was semi-conscious. I couldn't move my arms very well. I couldn't speak. I was slurring. My skin was turning purple in front of me. I couldn't button up my jeans, my shirt. And then luckily there was a knock on the back door. And I remember falling downstairs, and I got to the back door, opened the door. And after that, I don't really remember much. But apparently Lucy and my stepdad were looking at me mortified. The paramedics were called straight away. Luckily, it was a Sunday morning, so they arrived within 5 minutes. They'd just been to a call in the same village, as luck would have it. The paramedics came in, they took one look at me and said, "Look, this guy's probably got 20 minutes. We need to get him into ICU in Winchester now." So I was dispatched very quickly. After about 4 minutes of the journey, I dipped, and they said, look, we need to get a shortcut somewhere. We're really struggling. And again, that whole Sunday morning, no traffic, all the cut throughs were quiet. And I got to Winchester in time. And I remember bursting through the double doors, lots of questions being asked, me not really understanding, Lucy trying her best to answer the questions. And I remember one guy said, have you been near any watercourses, rivers, watercourses? And I said, and I remember Lucy saying, no, he hasn't. And after what felt like a minute, I remember trying to tug at her arm saying, but we have a storm drain in the back of our pub in the countryside, and we have a river at the back of our restaurant. And having a beautiful golden Labrador, that we spent all our time along the river. So Lucy relayed the information, and the consultant at the time said, well, I think we're going to treat him for Weil's disease, which you catch through rat's urine. And luckily for us, there was a changeover, and one consultant saw me, and he came over and he said, have you diagnosed what this chap's got? And the other consultant said, yes, we think he's got Weil's disease. And this chap said, no, he hasn't. He's got strep A. And we didn't understand what on earth that was. And I was placed on life support immediately afterwards. I was in life support for 4 days. On the third day, my family were told I had a 3% chance of survival. They were told to go away on the third night, prepare to say their final goodbyes in the morning. They said that they could wake me mechanically, and then I wouldn't hear anything, but Lucy and my mum would be able to say their final goodbyes. And luckily for me, on that third night, the consultant looking after me had heard about some trials in the US that had been undertaken on strep A, and he felt that there was nothing left to lose. We had nothing more. That was his last chance, really. If he was going to survive, we're going to have to try whatever that was. And in the morning, I woke up. My family came in. I remember all this commotion. I didn't really understand what the hell was going on. And they said, oh, you've got strep A. I still didn't really understand what that was. And 4 days later, I was moved to Salisbury. Winchester said they couldn't continue with my care, was the official line. And they moved me from Winchester to Salisbury, which is only about 40 minutes away. And I arrived at in intensive care again, but there was a plastics department in the same floor. And I remember, I think my family picked up on that. I didn't have a clue. And I remember going in there and getting on a really comfy bed. And 5 minutes later, my family had gone into a waiting room, and I was lying there, and this beautiful, stunning woman kind of wafted past me and around the bed. And I'm looking at her thinking, my goodness, you're very attractive. And she had her scrubs on and a mask and a blue cap. And she said, hello, how are you? And I said, oh, I'm very well, thank you. How are you? And she goes, you're incredibly polite. I said, well, my mother brought me up correctly to, be polite to women. And I was trying my best to be a bit flirty, which probably wasn't coming off very well. And she said, but you're not very well. And her next sentence was, you're certainly going to lose your left arm above the elbow. We think we can save your lower leg, but you'll certainly lose your feet and your ankles. We think we can save your right arm, but it involves pioneering surgery, where I will move your entire left shoulder down your back and fuse it into your right arm. You're certainly going to lose parts of your face. And we think what we might be able to do is to take a swathe of your right shoulder and around your rib cage and perform the first double flap operation for missing lips. And then she walked out the room, and there I was, just going, well, I felt I was going mad. I couldn't believe what I'd heard. But the following day, true to her word, I went in for my first operation. And from then on, they were all amputated.
To be honest, I know that's measuring more than any person could actually comprehend. So I get that sort of, it's almost like the brain stutters, and
yeah.
And then it's just, you just follow the process, because it's not in your hands anymore. It's literally, you get locked into the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was nothing, we couldn't understand that right at the beginning before I had my first operation. And it took a psychologist to come in and see me on the morning of the op for my left arm to be removed. And I remember her coming in saying, look, your family don't want to talk to you about this because they're very, very concerned, and they're concerned about how you're going to react with losing your left arm. And she explained to me with my surgeon that if we don't remove the left arm, the strep will get to your heart and it will kill you. So the left arm has to be first. There's a process in all of these things. And at that point, I remember being able to see my legs and my arms, and they were jet black. It was like severe frostbite, really. Everything was dead, and the strep was killing it, and you could almost monitor each day how bad it got. It was quite incredible. So I understood when they explained to me that, you know, the strep was going to kill you. What am I going to say? I'm not going to say let it get me. I'm going to fight as best I can. So yeah, I'm more than happy to lose my left arm. And then the psychologist reminded me, and she goes, "Well, but you are left-handed." And I hadn't even thought about that. And I thought, no, you're absolutely right. But I couldn't care at that point. We just wanted to go. I just wanted to get in and get it started. I was so heavily drugged. I was placid, easygoing, which I am normally, but the drugs were helping. And, you know, the surgeries continued from kind of late November to Christmas Eve, I think. So it's full on.
I mean, people talk about mental fitness and resilience, but, you know, that's half, even more, the battle, because it's the mental side which actually that's the thing you bounces around inside, and there's not much that you can be done to help that. You just literally have to process. So yeah, I
think it was fascinating in a way, because I'd never ever spent a night in hospital until that period. And in Salisbury, once the amputations and the trips to theatre started, I never ever had time to think about the future. You were very much living in the present. There was no time to think, okay, so what happens in, you know, a month's time when I realize I've got no limbs left? What am I going to do then? I had no time for that thought. It was just in and out, and you sleeping. I was awake every 3/4 of an hour, being rolled and turned and moved, and my kidneys had failed, so I was on dialysis. And I mean, every machine that possibly beeped was lying next to me. I think that's what it felt like.
You see, you know, like there's nothing wrong with your sense of humor or your personality, and you know that, and as much as these things are done to you, they're the core. You've kept the core there of who you are as a person. So, what do you think was one of your aha moments? What really sort of was that point?
I think I probably had two, really. So the first one was, I hadn't seen my son all the way through the process until Christmas Eve. And I remember the day before Christmas Eve saying to Lucy, look, I'm desperate to see him. You know, I know I've got theatre in the morning, but it's a small operation, and I'll be awake in the afternoon, and it's Christmas, and all I wanted was a cuddle, really, from my little boy. I missed him terribly. And because I spent the first 2 3/4 years of his life, he was in a papoose in front of me for all this time. All of a sudden, I felt that it had been cut by the surgeries and by the strep. And I was slightly resentful of that, I think, at that point. So Lucy agreed to bring him in. And I remember at Christmas Eve, I'm lying in the bed thinking, oh my God, this is going to be incredible. I'm going to see my little boy. It's going to be wonderful. And I remember it was quite late, and about sort of 7:30, 7:45. And I remember seeing Lucy come through, and I could see her through the double doors at the end of the ward. And I just, it was just a feeling like I've never had before. And she walked in, and then 2 or 3 minutes later, my little boy followed. He was out with the nurse playing outside. And when he came in, he's looking around the intensive care unit and he's seeing all these machines and people he didn't recognize. And then in the corner of the room, he saw me and he looked. And then once he realized it was me, he hid behind his mother's legs because he was scared stiff at what he saw. Now, I hadn't actually seen a picture of myself in a mirror since I got in there. And I remember a nurse took a photo and all my face was completely black around here. My ears were black. My hair was disheveled, and I'm missing my left arm. I've got my right arm bandaged up. At that point, I'd lost both legs above the knee, unfortunately. So I was half the man that he knew. And that look on his face will haunt me forever. And at that point, all I wanted was to try and Lucy as well, we just wanted to make him try and feel it's all right. You know, we've got this, we'll be fine. But we didn't know it was going to be fine. And he went away that night and he was petrified, really. And when he left the unit, that's the first time that I mentally hit the floor. And I was really struggling. And what the nurses did next was quite phenomenal. So the nurse on the ward that night, she said, she rang Lucy and said, look, Lucy, I'm really concerned. Alex is really, really down. We've never seen him like this. He's always been the one chatty and, you know, having a conversation and being, you know, quite positive. And she said, is there anything that we can do or bring in to cheer him up? And Lucy said, well, the only other thing would be to allow you to have the Labrador next to him by his bedside. And Lucy laughed and the nurse said, let's do it, bring her in. And that night I didn't know, and I saw Lucy again through the doors and thinking, that's a bit weird, why is she back? And then in bounded my 3.5-year-old golden Labrador. Now in that unit at the time there was me and 6 other people, and as soon as the dog came in the ward, everybody was lifted. Our spirits were, oh my goodness me, isn't that what? It's Christmas Eve. We're all fed up. We don't want to be in hospital. And that Labrador just didn't have a care in the world. And she came bounding in. She went to every bed, saw every nurse. And it just was an incredible gesture from the National Health Service. And that one nurse, it was phenomenal. And that was one moment that I thought, okay, but we're good now. There is some good in the world. And all I do now is to fight to get my son back on track and to realize that his dad's still around. You know, his mum's still around. We're still together. We can fight through this. And then the second part was when they saved my right arm through surgical procedures, which were phenomenal. And I loved being a guinea pig. And when I left hospital, I was invited up to London to go on TV. And my best mate had moved in with us at that point, and he was helping being a OT physio / best friend, godfather. And we had a chance to just go into London and be boys again, really. So we went in, we were on TV in the morning with Holly Willoughby. It's a long story, but Holly Willoughby has always been a bit of an apple in my eye. And my Labrador, when I had pet passport, was Holly Willoughby Lewis. So to meet Holly Willoughby was a big thing. And we met her. And then we went into London and we went to Soho and we went to great restaurants, and it cost a fortune. We had to get a taxi back, which cost 500 quid. And then we had champagne at the restaurant that was open at 2 a.m. And I got home and I remember Lucy looking at me and I'm thinking, this has got divorce written all over it. And I went to bed, and the following morning, I always wore a strap on my hand and my wrist. And in the morning, I woke up and I tried to push myself up, and I couldn't do it. I'd always been using that right arm to get myself out of bed. So I rolled over and I managed to push myself up with my left arm. I raised my right arm to survey what was going on, and I'd snapped it clean in half. Through the night, I'd rolled over and broken it. And I was rushed back into Salisbury, where I met with the plastic surgery team. They had tears in their eyes. They were mortified. They thought I'd done something irresponsible in London, which, not that I could remember, but I'm sure I didn't do it there. I'm convinced. And my plastic surgeon, she came up to me and she goes, look, we're going to have to put it in plaster and have a load of tests done. So we did that. And about 6 o'clock that evening, me and my best mate had been in the waiting room for hours and hours. He was asleep, getting over his hangover. And I'm sat there thinking, oh God, what have I done? And she came in and she knelt down in front of me and she was crying. And I'd never seen emotion from her, my plastic surgeon, before. She was always very clear cut down the line. This is what we're doing. This is what's going to happen. And we've become, I respected her more than anybody that I'd ever met. She was phenomenal. And she knew exactly what, she was just a class above the rest. So when she was crying in front of me, I was mortified that I caused that, was the first thing. And then she said, look, we've run some tests. We don't think, we could try and pin it, but it would mean 2.5 years of no rehabilitation. You just looking at an arm, being unable to use a wheelchair, being unable to move forward with the line, or we can amputate. And I said, well, what are the tests saying? And she went, well, we're waiting on one that comes back, I think that was the following day. And I said, look, I don't want to delay my rehab. Let's amputate. And she said, no, you can't just say that. You have to go back with your family, discuss it. So I went home that night and we had an awful conversation, Lucy and I, and Chris and my dad and my mum and my stepdad. And I said, look, I just don't want to spend 2 years doing nothing. You know, I thought I was doing really well and it's put me right back. So that night we agreed to have it amputated. The following day I went into Salisbury and we started the process. And my surgeon came up to me and she goes, we got that test back. And I said, all right. She went, yeah, that you've always had an underlying infection ever since you left hospital, and we could not figure out what it was. And she said, it transpires that the strep A had got into your bone in your right arm. Now, we had no way of picking this up. And luckily, you broke that arm so we could see it, and now we can treat it. And I said, I like the way you said that's lucky. What was unlucky in that situation? And she said, well, if you'd looked after your arm, and if you hadn't have been, you know, out and doing whatever you're doing, and you rolled over that night, we would never have picked it up. The chances are the strep would have taken your entire arm to your shoulder. Worse than that, it would have killed you. And I thought, that's a good result. That was a good night out.
Yeah. You know, it's very difficult when things happen like that to see why, but when you do actually, when the message becomes clear, it's a light bulb moment. So I'm so happy that you've been able to actually share a real proper light bulb moment. And also your bravery at this point. I know that I know it's when it's the bravery doesn't seem to count, but from looking in, it's, yeah, I think anyone watching will feel that. So tell me, because this is going to be super interesting, has there been an inspiring quote or a mantra which has sort of kept you going?
Yeah, so after about 8 or 9 months, I think, being at home, and I'd been to rehab, and I did all my rehab as best I could, got prosthetics, and I was starting to navigate my way through quadruple amputation at that point. And we'd set up the Alex Lewis Trust because we knew at that stage that prosthesis were hellishly expensive. The NHS simply couldn't afford to furnish me in what I required. I should think at that point I'd cost the NHS over £1 million, and to keep me in prosthesis from at that point 34 to 60 was about £3.5 million. So I was never going to get the right kit that way. But through hospitality, a lot of people were starting to come into the restaurant, the pub, and saying, "Oh my God, we've heard about Alex. What can we do?" And they were doing Tough Mudders and Ironmans and skydives and all this great stuff. And they were helping. They were keeping Lucy and I above the water, really, because we were very down at that stage because of the cost of everything. And I remember I got a letter through the post, and Lucy opened it up. And I remember she picked up this check and she's looking at it and she said, "There's a check here." I said, "Yeah." She goes, "It's for £10,000. And I was like, "Bloody hell, really?" And she went, "Yeah, it's the name that's a bit confusing." I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, on the check it says Coldplay." And I said, No, it doesn't. Don't be ridiculous. Show me the check. And she brought it over, and it was a check from Coldplay.
Wow.
So and we had this note accompanying the check, and I read this note from Chris Martin, and he said, look, we've seen articles on you in New York, and you've been all over the world in the press, and we think how you're coping with what's happened is phenomenal. What you want to do is just admirable, and we want to help you in your journey. And then he said, I'd like you to, if you've got more surgery coming up, you've got some spare time, I'd like you to read a book. And it was Man's Search for Meaning by Frankl. And I'm not a big reader, so I thought, well, Chris Martin's telling me, so I'll do it. And I remember I had loads of facial surgery coming up. So I went into hospital and I downloaded it onto the iPad and I read the book. And he said to me in the letter, he said, there'll be a quote in the book. He said, there's many quotes, but, certain aspects of the book shine out to me, and there'll be something that grabs you and it will really resonate with what you're going through. So I was reading it through, and after about 2/3 of the way, I got to this quote, and it wasn't by Frankl, but it was, once you work out the why, you will endure anyhow. And I remember lying in bed, and I was in an unknown ward. It was very, very quiet. It was in the dead of night. And I thought, God, it is that simple, because my why was Lucy and Sam. They were the reason that I was going through all these amputations and willingness to go to rehab and learn all these new skills just to further me in the world and also to help them. And the how was living with quadruple amputation. But I think once I saw that quote, quadruple amputation didn't really make that much difference. It was almost like it wasn't there. It was just, my head was 95% we're doing it for Lucy and Sam, and the 5% was the physical aspect of the quadruple amputation.
Amazing. And the kindness of strangers.
Absolutely.
And that does stir something very much in the soul, to actually hear that, other people can and will and be willing to help. So, wow. Well, look, I am going to now ask you about all the wonderful things you've done, because I must admit, I've been on your website, which is fantastic. So I advise anyone to go on there. Tell us about what has been a real, because you're a big adventurer. So what has been sort of the most memorable adventure you've been on?
I've been very lucky. I'd started up with a military charity who took on their first civilian, and I was that guy. And we've been cage diving with the Pilgrim Bandits. We've been skydiving. We kayaked around the southern tip of Greenland. We kayaked along the Orange River in Africa. But all these trips were fantastic for personal development, and I needed that at that point. I needed to realize that there probably weren't any limits for what we could do. And then I was invited to go on a trip to Ethiopia. And this gentleman said to me, look, why don't we do some hand cycling down to Lake Tana, then we'll cross Lake Tana on kayaks around the hippos, and then we'll do some whitewater rafting at the source of the Blue Nile. And I thought, immediately, my kind of boyish attitude was like, that sounds amazing, let's do it. But when I got home, I was chatting to a good friend of mine, and I said, it sounds great, but I've done a bit of that already. And what I feel is that we fly into these places, these amazing countries, and we do something fantastic for each and every one of us, but then we fly back out. Apart from spending a few dollars in these areas, what are we actually leaving? And I thought, that isn't for me now. I want to do something where that I can say that there's a legacy left behind the trip that we go on. So I was doing some university research across London and the south of England, and we went to University of Southampton. We said, right, we've got an idea for you guys. It was a fag packet idea. We'd like you to build the world's first solar-powered, battery-charged, four-wheeled custom hand cycle for a quadruple amputee. And it's got to get up 30% gradient, and it's got to be able to run for about 8 hours a day. We can charge batteries overnight, but we will be in a mountain range in Ethiopia. So all the students jumped at the chance to work on it because it just sounded nuts, and it was nuts. And it took 2 years to get all the the ethics approval, the insurances and everything else. But at the end of 2019, we went over there and we'd raised 50 grand in London because we were going to set up a wheelchair factory in Bahadar, which we've done. And I remember we flew into Bahadar and all our wheelchairs are sprayed bright blue. And I remember we were driving through the city and we started to see our wheelchairs as we were driving through. And we can sell those wheelchairs for $200, whereas most wheelchairs, mine, for instance, is about 7.5, 8 grand. So NGOs buy 80% of our wheelchairs at the moment. And so we are making a difference to an area that is incredibly underserved. And we did actually somehow manage to cycle up Ethiopia's highest mountain. We did it with an amazing girl called Emma Bett, who's a wheelchair basketball hero in Ethiopia, who's 21. And she was just a goddess. She was phenomenal. And her and I, we cycled up Ethiopia's highest mountain. And it was just the best thing that I've done to date from a support point of view, the Transbalam, everything, all these things that I kind of dreamt of doing since I came back from Africa the first time. We achieved in that 3 weeks over there. It was just incredible, absolutely incredible.
I mean, that really is a legacy, and that's a proper impact, and that's your Wild Wheelchairs limb to your trust, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the Wild Wheelchairs project, and we recently set up a project called Project Limitless, where we aim to supply every child in the UK under 10 with a prosthetic arm, every child born with limb difference, because prosthesis and wheelchairs are the bane of my life. Yeah. They're expensive, they break down, they're hard to get, and I think in these times, I think a lot of telemedicine and alternative ways of having access to devices, certainly assistive devices, needs to be looked at. So we're the Project Limitless has been phenomenal, and I think we've made 200 arms in the last 3 months for kids that need them, and they've all been sent out. They're all COVID response. They're made, they're sent. If they don't fit, they come back, we tweak them, send them back out, which is phenomenal. And we run a network of a buddy system, really, so that all the kids and their families can get in contact with people like me that have used prosthesis, that understand, what they can and can't do. And we want to build a network, really, of globally. We started in the UK because we can monitor it very closely. As things get a little bit easier, then we're starting with Syria. We've done some work in Sri Lanka, and then we're working with the government in Sierra Leone and in Uganda. So we want to try and make it easier for everyone, really, with limb difference globally, to access the devices that they need to give them the ability to play sport, ride a bike, use a scooter, learn to paint, learn to draw, learn to write. All the simple things that sometimes you forget just how easy it was when you were 2, 3, 4, 5. And, not having arms now, I look at my son and think, I'm so jealous that you can do all this and move it around. But on the flip side, without my quadruple amputation, I wouldn't be the dad I am now.
To be honest, I think what people will be blown away with is that there's a very seductive side to think, oh, I'm done, but you've deliberately channeled it to help others, which I think is and as you said, it has made you the dad, the person, the shining light you are. So we wouldn't wish it on anyone, but you've really owned it, which is just it's
and I love owning it. I mean, in the last year, I think when I came back from Ethiopia, I had a very sharp decline in my mental health because I was concerned that we hadn't done enough. In the 2.5, 3 weeks we were there. Did we do enough in that 2 years prior to going? Could we have done more? What could we have done? Which is why we're going out to Mongolia this year to try and set a new world record of a 500-kilometer loop, just on solar charge on a bike in the Gobi Desert. But for me, it's a network, a lot of anyone with disability, with mental health issues, we're all in the same boat. And I think it's just access to a network to find the right help, to be in contact with each other, can make a huge, huge difference.
No, I think you're right, and the communities are very, very important. And with COVID, we've got now online communities where has been most we hadn't had them before. So a new breed of community. So, is there anything you're working on at the moment? Obviously, you're preparing for your next trip. Is there anything which is sort of going on at this moment?
Yeah. So, a lot of the research projects we've been involved with, a big part of it for us is trying to get these students out of their universities and into the world of business. What I didn't realise with universities in the UK is that there's this silo of information that gets parked at the end of these kids in their 2, 3, 4 years at uni. And I remember going into the biomechatronic department in Imperial, and it was just awash with 3D printed machines. One could 3D print pieces of the skull replacement, and it was done, 9 years ago, and it's just in the corner gathering dust. So a big part of our research is to give the kids the idea that they could actually spur out at the university and work for themselves, and follow on with a project that ultimately helps an end user like me, people with disability. So what we try and do is partner all these student projects with people of varying disabilities that can give end user feedback, that these projects aren't being dreamed up by people with legs and arms that don't know much about being an amputee or being paralyzed or being tetraplegic or suffering with ALS, all these different things. So we try and match them with the right person. So these products can be looked at and continue to be looked at until it's good enough to take to market. Then the university makes some money, the students make some money, and everyone's happy. Certainly the community that will benefit from it.
It's a win all round, isn't it, really?
Yeah, that's how we see it. And that's, we spend a lot of time doing that. And we work with various startups from prosthesis development. We have a fantastic startup looking at the treatment and monitoring of Parkinson's disease, which was spun out of work on bionics. I just about left college with 3 A-levels at best. There was no desire to go to uni, and in hindsight I should have done. I regret not going massively, and now I spend all my time there loving it.
I was going to say you've come full circle now. Well, look, we're going to move now to the second part of the show, which is where I get to ask you as my guest genie for my 3 wishes. So are you ready to impart your wisdom?
I will try my best. I have to dig it, but I'm in there somewhere.
So here we go. The first wish is, what is the best advice you received in your life?
I think the best advice I received in my life was when I lost my right arm. And I remember going back home and chatting to Lucy about it. And, she said, well, there's nothing stopping you now. What is there out there? What more can happen to you now? You've lost everything. And I said, well, I haven't lost everything because I've got you, I've got Sam. And she said, no, I don't mean everything, but, physically you can't play golf again. And what you might as well try everything. And I thought, you're right. I shouldn't just be sat here thinking about whether I can do it. And I think at that point, it was a case of, we're going to go out and make it happen. We weren't going to sit and wait for it to come to us. We were going to try and chase it.
Go on the offensive rather than...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think because of what she said, and then I remember relaying that information to my plastic surgeon, and she's like, absolutely, you've got, the world's your oyster now. And I think about 3 months later, I remember going to a prosthetic clinic and telling them that I'd like to, I think I'd already bought the bike. So I went to a prosthetic clinic and I said, right, I've just bought a hand cycle, but I haven't got any hands. So I'm here in front of you to say, what can you build me, arms and hands, to give me the ability to cycle? And they looked at me and said, well, we're not too sure. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, it's never been done before. And I said, there must be somebody globally that's missing both legs above the knee, arms like me, that can hand cycle. And they went, well, we've researched every prosthetic clinic that we know globally. We put it out to all our network, and no one's ever gone about the way you've done it, by buying the bike first and then telling us to fit me to it.
So a fait accompli there then. So right back.
And I think I had an assumption that these things had been done before, because I knew I wasn't the only quadruple amputee. But then all of a sudden, we were the only ones that were kayaking in Greenland, and we were the only ones doing a lot of the stuff we're doing. And I think because it felt so different, that was part of the attractive aspect, that we weren't just doing something that anybody else could do. A big thing for me is that at some point in the next 2-3 years that we intend to row across the Atlantic, me and 3 mates, but I'll be using a hand cycle system in an ocean going rowing boat. And then we intend to cross the Atlantic, which for a guy that has got no arms and can't swim, that would be quite big. So
I think I'm worried about the no swimming part, to be honest. Wow. Well, that's more than answered my first wish. You're super overqualified for this. So I'm going to go to my second wish, which is, and this is going to be interesting. What advice would you give your younger self?
That's quite easy. That was to work harder, because I was so relaxed, horizontal really, and I never ever knew what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be. I never had a career path. I never had something in my mind that I thought I'm going to see that through. And it took losing all my limbs to give me that ray of light, that light bulb moment, to realize that I am going to spend the rest of my life working in charity and assistive devices and trying to make a difference. And I've loved every single second of the work that we've done.
It's given you a true purpose. It's like you found your true calling. Wow. Yeah. No, very, very powerful indeed. And I know it mostly put you on the path which you were always meant to follow, but things work in very strange ways. So
absolutely.
Amazing. And I'm delighted that you are where you are and you're doing what work you're doing. So
thank you.
That's wonderful. So that then brings me to my third and final wish, sadly, which is, could you share one personal habit you have which attributes to your success?
I get asked this quite a lot, and usually it's about business, and I'm rubbish at business. I mean, I'm just really good at kind of giving myself up to be a guinea pig. But I'd say my best personal habit is that I listen. And it's the one thing that we tell all the people that we work with at universities: you can be as free with what you do outside of the time that you've got with us, but please listen. Because I think certainly in disability, and you look at various forums and you see the amount of people that have been let down, forgotten about, not served correctly, and all that could have been addressed by people listening. And I think, for me, we try and take in as much as possible. Funnily enough, I had so much anesthesia in my first 3-4 weeks in hospital that my short-term memory is absolutely butchered. I haven't got one, but my long-term is absolutely on the money. So I always have to make sure that somebody's taking notes behind me or writing something down. And then I can always track back. But I think listening is a fantastic quality. Yeah. And certainly at the moment, when there are a lot of voices trying to be heard all over the world, communities that are suffering. I live in the UK. We're incredibly lucky. And we do have an amazing health system, and we do have lots of access to all sorts of things. But, the work that we do in Ethiopia, and obviously when we go to Mongolia, and wherever we're going to find ourselves in the future, Syria, Sierra Leone, we're not going to find that. And I think, listening could be a major part of changing that.
And very overlooked and misunderstood. So you've really been able to illustrate the value of listening there. So that's wonderful. Well, look, where can we find you? Because, so far, I'm sure everyone's going to be wanting to know where they can find you.
So if you head to the Alex Lewis website, so www.alex-lewis.co.uk, that's got most of our recent stuff on the go. You'll find me on Instagram under Alex Lewis Trust. And then obviously Facebook and the usual social media bits and pieces, we're all out there. And then, head to the website and we try and update as much as we can. It'll give you information on Limitless Project. It'll give you information on Mongolia and Ethiopia and all the other things. It's not just that. We're involved with the WHO, various startups, imperial universities, assistive technology forums, prosthetic clinic forums. It's all sorts of bits and pieces. We spread ourselves very thinly.
You're dealing with many pies, so that's quite.
I haven't got any fingers. It doesn't matter.
Oh, bless you. So I also saw on the website that if people want to get involved, there's also a donating page as well. So
the donation page is more about giving us, Rosemary and I, the ability to continue the work without being paid. Yeah. The universities can't afford to pay us, and we don't want to be paid. We don't want the students to feel that it's being paid for, because it does alter their commitment to the project. If I'm honest, it's good that we're available to them, and then obviously Project Limitless can be looked up as well, and there's a donation page for that.
It keeps it as soon as you put money in things, it kind of it spoils the pot. So
it does, unfortunately. It's because we're involved with so many things. I think there is an assumption that you must be making loads of money. Well, we're most certainly not. These things do come at a cost, and we will continue to do as much as we can on as little as we can, really.
Amazing. And we mentioned the Viktor Frankl's book. Is that your kind of chosen book, or do you have another one?
Again, this is another question I get asked a bit, but I've always given what I feel is the right intellectual answer. But I think one of the most important books in my life. I used to love cooking, loved it, and my partner Lucy, she used to work for Michel Roux and Marco Pierre White and Gordon Ramsay many years ago in London. And her work ethic is just unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. And it's a very chef-orientated work ethic. But I remember many years ago, my mum bought me the Le Gavroche cookbook by Michel Roux Jr. And I reckon I probably read that book more than any other book, because I would always turn to a recipe that would give me enjoyment, a certain ingredient that you can't get certain times of the year that you could pick up when you went to the market. And I think since I lost my limbs, I try and teach my son to cook, which I'm failing dismally at. and I try and cook, but it requires sort of him and me doing it together. So it usually ends up. And I think not being able to grab that book and turn to a page and a recipe that would give me immense enjoyment, and Lucy and my son, I find that really frustrating. But yeah, that book, the Gavroche cookbook, has seen me through some incredible moments, really. Wow. So I would recommend, if you're into culinary technique and cuisine, that's a good way to start.
Amazing. Wow. And I can see that it gives a nice escape, and it gets all the senses sort of into it. So I really, I love that. Well, look, unfortunately, we've come to the very end, and I know that we could talk for hours and hours, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Alex. your bravery and your determination. Some call it stubbornness, or the flip side of that is determination. But whatever it is, you've got a lot of it. And I thank you for being a very overqualified genie. And I wish you the very best in your trips. And I'm excited to follow and see where you're going next.
There's lots to come. There's lots in the pipeline, lots to do.
Awesome. Well, look, guys, if you've been watching this and if you've been inspired and as moved as I am, reach out to Alex. We know where he is. And if you can just take 1% of what he said today, I think your life would become better overnight. So thank you once again, Alex.
No, thank you.
And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next release, the Genie. Goodbye and keep safe.
Well, that's a wrap. You have been listening to yet another episode of the Release the Genie podcast with host Paul Rogers. Be sure to follow Paul on the LinkedIn platform and learn more of Paul's resources at www.takeactionacademy.ca. And until next time, as always, be mindful and be sure to release your genie. Thanks for listening.